Hello and welcome to Raven's Plains. My name's Raven Black. We're on location here in Sparta, Michigan at the Paul C. Miller Sparta Airport. Today I'll be going over new settings to get your VR frame rate where it needs to be. I'm going to show you my settings in VR as well as the new tweakables that we can do real time in VR to really improve your frame rate. If you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe, and follow me on Twitter at Raven's Plains to get updated information on new content and videos. So how about we get this plane in the air? So now that we're in the air, let's talk about what you're going to need. You're going to need Fly with Lua. You're going to need OVR Settings. And OVR Settings only works with Oculus products. And then lastly, we're going to need VMI Twick. And I'll show you how to get all those installed right now. Alright, let's get started. First, you're going to want to download the 3 programs that we need. All the links are in the description below. And so the first one's Fly with Lua. You're going to want to download this file. You're going to want to download the OVR Settings and the VMI Twick, which is the tweaking file for tweaking all kinds of stuff inside X-Plane, and works in 2D as well. So once you have these downloaded, you're going to want to install them. And so with Fly with Lua, I'll open this one up, and it's just one folder. It has all the Fly with Lua stuff in it. So you need to go into X-Plane, and then go into Resources, and then go into Plugins, and then the Plugins folder, you're just going to drop it in there. Should copy over. And there's Fly with Lua. So if you open up Fly with Lua and then go into the scripts folder, there's going to be a file that says please read the manual.lua. You're just going to want to rename that by putting a period in front of it. This makes it so that it doesn't come up and say read the manual and have like a bunch of text on the screen. This is the only way to get rid of that. So you do that before you get in there, you'll be good to go. So staying inside the script folder, we have this OVR Settings Lua that we downloaded. You're just going to want to drop that into the script folders. This is X-Plane, Resources, Plugins, Fly with Lua, Scripts. You want to drop that in there. And then you're going to want to open up the zip file for the VMI Twick. Select everything in here and also drop this in the scripts folder as well. And we should be good to go. One note before we get started is that if you have 3J FPS installed, you're going to want to remove that before booting up X-Plane with these new programs, because the 3J FPS and the VMI Twick will collide and it won't be working correctly. Now I just want to talk a little bit about how to run X-Plane so that it doesn't use a lot of memory and stuff. So I always run it in this tiny window because I'm going to go into VR anyway. And it's going to have to render whatever is in this video, which is usually that cell phone aspect ratio of the game. And I want that small as possible so it doesn't use up much resources. I also don't want to load into any plane or any scenery because I don't know where I'm going to fly right now. So when I first load in, I want it to be blank, a blank slate. So nothing's in memory. I'm not going to switch planes and then that plane's going to take up some memory when it doesn't go away or it just crashes. It's best just to boot it up this way. So now that we're back into X-Plane, I'm going to show you my settings. I'm going to make this bigger so you guys can see it. If you go into the flight configuration, AI aircraft. I usually keep this blank because Each AI aircraft takes up CPU power, calculating where it's going and other things like that. Also, most of them are just flying around me, maybe a couple miles out. I never get to see them or anything. They just take up CPU power, so I just keep this blank. Especially for GA, like there's never any like planes taking off usually, so I just keep this blank. And now into the settings. So these are my graphic settings. This side of the graphic settings affects your video card. This side affects your CPU. Visual effects, I keep around 4 clicks in. I have a 2070 RTX card, so that's pretty good. So I can run this pretty high. Texture quality, I run around here. I never really fill my video card up with textures, but going any higher doesn't really seem to do much for me, so I just keep it around this area. Anti-aliasing I usually keep off when I'm recording, because recording with anti-aliasing on slows down. It doesn't look very good actually when you record, and once it gets compressed into a video, it pretty much gets anti-aliased anyway. But if I'm just running it, not recording, I can do about 2 clicks in, and I may lose about 1 frame. Draw shadows on scenery. This checkbox just makes your computer run slow, so I keep that off. This just kills frame rate for no reason. Onto the CPU side. Number of world objects. This directly affects frame rate, probably the most out of all these. I can run it about 4 clicks in, because I have a pretty fast CPU, as I have an 8700K. For slower CPUs, you're going to want to run this a little bit less than this. Reflection detail, this just kills your PC, this whole slider. So I just keep this down. You're still, even at the 0 clicks in, it's still going to give you reflections on your plane. It's going to give reflections on your windows. Everything's going to look fine. This slider just makes your computer run slow. And then draw parked aircraft I have checked. And with that, there is the other tool I'm going to be showing you. You'll be able to directly control how many aircraft are parked around you. And that pretty much sums up my X-Plane settings. So this is the default settings I come in before I start tweaking everything. So now we're going to talk about VMI Twick. In the bottom left corner, there's going to be a button that says Auto. You can click that. And this is the VMI Twick thing. This works in VR, and it also works in 2D. And I'll show you how to pull this up in VR when we get into that. It's going to start on auto mode. Auto mode's alright. It should give you a pretty decent frame rate. But I like to go into user mode and specifically pick what I want. So the first tab is FPS control, and it basically just says desired FPS, and you select that, and then it'll tell you what your actual FPS is. The auto LED, auto clouds, this is part of the auto mode. And if I go into my user settings, and let's go and select, this is what I usually run with. So these are my settings for how I get at least 45 frames in VR. Right now it says 80, but that's because I'm in 2D. And I run the LOD and clouds 75 to 50%. We go into the lights menu. Now this lights menu changes depending on a checkbox in the settings here below. The only checkbox I've ever really played with, which is this VR mode. As you can see, the lighting drastically changes between VR mode and normal mode. You're going to want to run VR mode. It actually looks pretty good. It gives like this sun, this nice bloom here. I'm going to change the time here. So you can see the sun has like a nice bloom versus this, which doesn't really look as good as I think as this. You can see planes disappearing and stuff, and I'll be showing you that in just a second, why that's going on. But I didn't really tweak any of these other light settings. I just clicked that box. All right, now to the shadows menu. Now the only thing I changed here was the cloud shadow radius and cloud shadow ratio. Because in VR, for some reason, and it may actually happen on desktop as well, but you'll get this like cloud flicker, and it's really annoying. And so I just turn these all off. Turn them off. So, I mean, you still get shadows off your plane, everything like that. It's just that you don't get this cloud flicker that causes it. Now onto the objects world menu. This is the one that it can really improve your frame rate with the number of cars and quantity of aircraft. So I can turn all these up. It'll respawn more of them. And you'll take a bigger frame rate because it's just rendering more vehicles and stuff like that. The cars I usually turn all the way down because those are in parking lots, and as you can see, even here, there's still a bunch of cars around. Quantity of aircraft, depending on the airport, and this is where you may have multiple settings. Depending on the airport, you may want this turned all the way down or up just a couple clicks. For an airport like this, it doesn't really spawn that many planes, but if you're at, say, KSNA in Santa Ana or someplace like that where it spawns a ton of planes, this is where you're going to get a lot of frame rate back by tweaking this. Onto the weather menu, I don't really do much with this. The fog level I've played with a bit. As you can see, you can bring the fog in more. Depending on if it's rendering trees and stuff, let me see if I can see this here. You'll see like the trees will start disappearing, and then you could match the fog up with that a little bit better, so you don't notice it as much. But yeah, these are my current. Oh, let me load this here. All right, this is what my current setting is for fog, and cloud puffs make the clouds bigger. Let me get some actual clouds here. Cloud puffs is weird because it'll make them actually just bigger, which can tend to look really bad. So I haven't really done much with that. I just leave it at 1, which is the default. I don't really need much more than that. And then the atmosphere menu, I haven't done anything with this. So yeah, these are my settings for VMI Twick. Where you're going to get the most frame rate is here, messing with the auto LODs. If I turn this all up, you'll watch my frame rate just tank. And so I just run it at about 50. And the clouds can affect it. Doesn't seem to be doing much. I have it at 100. Turn it all the way down. I get like 10. Well, spiking all over. Yeah, I get, 10 frames between 100 and that. So 75 seems to be good for that. And then again, the Objects World menu with number of cars and aircraft, this also directly affects your frame rate. And so those are basically the main settings you're going to be playing with to get your frame rate to where it needs to be above 45 for VR. And you can set all this up in here, but you're really not going to get to see what it is in VR unless you're in VR. One last thing I want to mention before we jump into VR is sim mode. This basically goes to the default settings for X-Plane. So this is what normal X-Plane looks like, I think. With then none of these other settings really tweaked. And then this is what my version looks like, which I like it. It's a little brighter. I like the tint and stuff from the sky. It looks really good in VR. So. And then you have auto mode, which will just kind of automatically adjust stuff. It's not as good as like 3J FPS's auto mode. So doing user modes is probably the best way. Presets. So once you get it all set up, select one of these buttons here and say save. Right now I have 2 presets, which is this one, which is what I use to fly most places. It spawns a few aircraft, spawns a few cars. The LOD distance is just barely as far as I can see, and it seems to work pretty well. And then I have this other set, which this spawns like everything. And also, as you can see from these yellow cones, it really pushes the LODs way out. This really can hurt my frame rate though at bigger airports. As you can see, if I go back to my normal settings, those yellow cones disappear. Which is not so bad. Once I get closer to it, it's actually pretty far out, but before in, you can see what's missing. I can probably tweak this better to even get that in there. I go back to it's going to be in the LOD settings here. So I push this up. You can see as the yellow cones and everything come back in at 90 versus 50. Looks to be about 10 frames, which is kind of a lot. Push it out to about 85. So it comes in, it's still there. So yeah, these are the settings you'll be tweaking in VR. And so let's jump into VR. All right, we're back in VR. We're here in Southern California at John Wayne Airport, or KSNA. And we're parked outside of Signature here. And how about I show you how to bring up VMI Twick. So you go to Advanced menu, go down to Plugins, go down to Fly with Lua, and then this one that says Fly with Lua Macros. And then towards the bottom is going to be Show Hide VMI Twick. And boom, there it is. Same program from the desktop. And so it's already loaded in my setting. It will save your settings, and every time you load into X-Plane, it'll load the exact same settings you had before. As you can see, it's running pretty smooth. Now, everything changes once you start up the airplane, because it's going to start calculating the airflow. It's going to start calculating all the stuff of how the plane functions, and also the screens and everything else. So it's best to do these settings with your plane on. So we're going to turn on the plane now. And I'm going to close the door so it's a little quieter. I guess that engine sound isn't so bad. But as you can see, there is a couple dips here and there because it's calculating the airflow over the wings, or the airflow from the prop over the wings and tail. And so you can tweak these real time. So for example, the planes that are around us, I can turn this down to 0. As you can see, they all disappear. I can also turn this all the way up. I'll spawn them all back in larger quantities. It seems to be running pretty good with it set all the way up. I've been doing stuff to this airport to better optimize it. Even though it's a payware airport, it still needed some work, so I'm kind of doing that just in my own spare time. Turn that down. You can turn the cars all the way up, and that seems to affect this, even though I don't really see that many cars. So let's turn this all the way back down. The number one thing that's going to change is the auto LOD. So if I go up and I just say 100% of objects, as you can see now, at 20 frames, it's starting to lag a bit. 19 frames. Put it back down to 50. I had it about back to 45 frames. Pretty solid. And as I look around, I can see that this is the dip from when I turned it up. So yeah, you can play with this in real time to tweak different settings. The cool thing is, let's say you fly into O'Hare and your frame rate just starts tanking, you can pull this thing up, tweak it real time, and continue flying with a better frame rate. Alright, next up is the OVR settings. Now the OVR settings are just for Oculus. They're pretty cool. If you go back into the Fly with Lua menu, and then back into Fly with Lua macros, at the very bottom you'll see OVR settings. So you pull this up, and it has two settings you'll be playing with. One is super sampling, and I'll get to that in a second. The other one is the asynchronous space warp, or ASW. These settings here seem to be subjective. Some people say different ones work better for their system than others. For me, the Force 45 with ASW disabled seems to work the best for me. I don't get those jitters anymore that I used to get. I either get like frame drops, like if I, for example, turn that up to 100%, but I never get those little stutters that I used to get before I got this program installed. The other thing is super sampling, so I'll switch it over to a super sampling of 0. And you know, a lot of people say, well, I can't read the text very well. You can use this super sampling, turn it up to 1.5, and it'll make these letters and everything a little more crisper, a little easier to read. In my previous tutorial on the VR optimization, I talked about the Oculus tray tool and how to set super sampling in that. My mistake was I would close it and then run X-Plane. Well, once you close the tray tool, all those settings go away. It only keeps those settings as long as the tray tool is open. So in my previous tutorial, I was basically having you set super sampling and then disable all of it and run X-Plane. So that's not really the best thing to do. With this, the cool thing is you can see it real time. You can see how everything gets more crisp going from like 0. You can look at the text, on here, and then if I just set it to like 2, you can really see how everything sharpens up. Even the text on this thing sharpens up. This will affect your frame rate. Right now it seems to be fine with 2, which is a little weird. Usually it takes my frame rate a lot more than that. I tend to run at about 1.5, and that seems to be pretty good, and I can keep a pretty consistent frame rate. One last thing. In my previous tutorial I talked about using 3J FPS. You can still use that with the OVR settings. The VMI Twick you will have to uninstall, and I have tested it out just using 3J FPS with the OVR settings. Everything works fine. I just think I like the finer tuning of what it's getting rid of in my scene, more than just letting like 3J FPS just pick random stuff that it's going to not render. But either way is a valid way of optimizing your VR. So once again, I hope this tutorial helped you out and got your VR in order so you can fly and land comfortably. Again, if you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe, and follow me on Twitter at RavenPlanes to get updates on videos and content and when I release videos. Pretty sure this isn't going to be my last tutorial I do on the subject, especially with Vulkan on the horizon coming very soon, and we'll see how that reacts with these different plugins. Once again, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this content. I hope to help you out, and until next time, I'll see you in the skies.